No? Oh. It's okay.
Over slightly. Move over slightly.
Okay.
God's sake, Poppy.
Why are you like always so angsty? I'm hooked in, that's what I know.
These are removable, aren't they? No, not really. So we're gonna have to do that weird thing where you kind of give your wife by like.
We're unable to pick these up, or oh wait, no, these are for points of information.
Am I using my phone? Because mine goes really weird at times.
So when we are speaking,
You're not, are you? Yeah.
Oh, even better. Oh, God.
I'm gonna get weak in the knees.
Can I have your attention for a moment, please? Would Professor Kazmir's students please go to the back of the room and take seats in the back, okay? Professor Kazmir's students, please take seats in the back. That's not a discriminatory thing. That's just logistics.
I hope Double is holding that up.
It's like the thing with the workshops as well. It's like it's better if we're all there than if we just only have half of us there. 'Cause it looks like we're more engaged with them. We want to be like we really love, especially when we blow the Florida tour.
Planning.
Have you really?
You're getting paternal again. They're fine.
Good. I'm more worried about my actual argument than actually going up there.
I see my name spelled right. I had the most fun of my life giving speeches.
We're just so beautiful. We only need one attempt.
Yeah.
You say the word team in the most classically Australian way.
It's like, any time I ever say stupid stuff like that is when I'm with Callum, my very gay debate mate, so it's like, oh my god, this is so
I was like when John was so excited. He was like, this is fucking sick. And I was like, oh, classic.
Points of information during the first six arguments to opposing sides.
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought that was how it was going to be anyway.
Wait. Yeah, don't bother doing points from the floor in any of the speeches.
because I think it might be
Because
hard to get
otherwise
through
it just, we won't, it'll be the only time the floor interacts with us is in their like designated floor bit after the sixth speech. So after who's third? Is it Mike? So after Mike's speech, then, oh wait, we're
off.
we're off. So after Mike's speech, then floor debate for as long as we realistically have time for while still getting in the two reply speeches and the votes stuff at the end.
Got it. I think Mike's talking
doing a vote on?
They are.
Cross cells.
Vote early and often.
Spend like 20 quid sending a single text to give us a vote.
You have a lot. American grad students.
Good morning, everyone.
This is all seen.
Please take your seats.
My tissues.
Very enthusiastic on this debate.
Greetings on this very exciting morning. First of all, welcome back from spring break. We are so very glad to see you all have returned. So, I want to welcome you to the first of two debates featuring members of the Cambridge Union Society, the world's oldest debating society. Together with Hofstra University student debaters, they intend to inform and entertain us with formal discussion and argumentation on two very important questions. The question before the House today is whether America needs the super rich. This question stems directly from issues currently being pursued in honors college courses called Culture and Expression. Most of the audience today has spent the better part of the semester investigating competing views on the origins and consequences of various social and economic models. Thus, this is a question we would all like to see addressed directly. Many people have worked very hard to bring this event to you. Special notice should be given to Professor Simon Doubleday, himself a Cambridge University alum, who is also a member of Hofstra's History Department and a regular teacher for Honors College, and who was responsible for initiating this project here at Hofstra. Ms. Athleen Collins, Director of the Cultural Center, and her staff also deserve special mention for their tireless and professional efforts at coordinating these presentations. We're also grateful to Colin Sullivan of University Relations for helping to communicate to the Hofstra community how exciting an opportunity this is. These debates have several sponsors, without whom they would not be possible. The Honors College's Pete Tellaha Memorial Fund is one of the lead sponsors, along with Bernard Firestone, Dean of the Hofstra College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, Evan Kornog, Dean of the Lawrence Herbert School of Communication, and Herman Berliner, Provost of Hofstra University. Since this is the first event to be sponsored partly by the Pete Tellaha Memorial Fund, I hope you will allow me a moment to explain its origins and purpose. The Pete Tellaha Memorial Fund was established by gifts from Pete's friends and family. Pete was a brilliant and much-loved HUHC student who died tragically in 2012 in an accident. Among his many talents, Pete was extraordinarily engaged with current events and always ready to think through and debate the issues of the day. He was a computer science major who had a deep interest in encryption and was actively entertaining the possibility of government work. So the two themes chosen for these debates reflect directly Pete's interests, and I like to think he'd be delighted to be with us. I am so glad and grateful that Pete's parents, Christopher and Suzanne Tellaha, and his sister, Elizabeth, can be with us today. Now, I have one other responsibility this morning before getting out of the way of our splendid debaters. I must explain how we will be determining the winner of today's debate. As you can see from the screen, we are asking audience members to indicate their position on our question before the debate takes place. So this will be the only time you'll ever hear me say this. You may take out your cell phones. Use your cell phone to send a text message to 37607 and insert the code number associated with your position. When the debate is over, there will be a second opportunity to vote. The winning team will be the side that moves the greatest percentage of the audience in their direction. Okay, so while you are voting, Please allow me to introduce let me say one other thing. While you got your phones out, please put them on silence. So while you're voting, please allow me to introduce our moderator, who will introduce our competitors and be guiding us through the proceedings. Our moderator today will be Professor Philip Dalton, Chair of the Rhetoric Department in the Herbert Lawrence School of Communications. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Philip Dalton. I'm the chair of the Department of Rhetoric here at Hofstra University. I'm also the Speaker of the House today. Today's debate will roughly model a form of debate called British parliamentary debate, which has its origins in British parliamentary procedure. The debate is divided between the government, which is arguing for today's resolution, and the opposition, which is opposing the resolution. There are 4 people on either side, a combination of both Cambridge Union Society debaters and Hofstra University debaters. And they are, with the government, from Hofstra University, KRISTA Miller; from Cambridge, John PAPANTONIou; Hofstra's Sean Williams; and Cambridge, Rachel Tukey. With the opposition, we have from Hofstra, Victor Parbat; from Cambridge, Poppy Damon; from Hofstra, Michael RISCICA; and from Cambridge, Matt Hazel. Each speaker will speak for as many as 7 minutes. The first and last minute of their presentations will go uninterrupted. Those minutes will be indicated by a rap of my gavel. So they'll begin. After the first minute, I'll rap my gavel. I'll be seated over there. After the first minute is expired, they may be open to points of information from the opposing team until the 6th minute of their presentation, at which time I'll rap my gavel again, and they get to go uninterrupted for another minute. It is up to the debater to allow for the point of information from their opponent. The first 4 speakers today are known as the opening faction, and they lay out the primary arguments of the debate. Next, the closing factions begin to offer further extension of teammates' arguments and refute the arguments made by their opponents. During this period, the same rules apply regarding points of information. Now, after the first 6 speakers speak, we'll open the floor to brief what's called the floor debate. And at that time, after the 6th speaker, people who are interested in directing a point of information, asking a question, or indicating questions that haven't been adequately addressed may walk to this aisle where Colin Sullivan will be available with a microphone, and you can make comments or indicate which questions haven't been adequately answered for you. The final speaker then will be tasked with summing up the arguments for both sides, and they may choose to address those points at that time. I did leave out that at the end of 7 minutes, I will wrap them off the lectern. That will indicate that their time is up. So with nothing more, I'd like to invite KRISTA Miller to the lectern.
I want to thank everybody for coming out today for today's debate, and I expect to have some fun talking about the super rich and the needs society has for them. But before I begin, I really want to thank the Cambridge Union Society for being here, because if they weren't here, we wouldn't be having this debate. So let's give them a round of applause. All right, now let's get down to business. It is this House's contention that the society needs the super rich. I don't know about you, but I'm attending college, so I can make more in the future than I'm making today. I want to better myself. I want to be able to achieve things. And I'm inspired by people like Oprah Winfrey and Steve Jobs. She's from a small rural area in Mississippi. Not a city, not a town, a rural area. She attended the University State Tennessee College. Said that wrong, but that's okay. And she was able to go on and be an international influence. Steve Jobs dropped out of Reed's College in Oregon. He went on to do multiple businesses and really made a real difference that we can see every single day. So it is the inspiration of the super rich that society needs and is so important. Now, before they were super rich, they had to be rich. But before they were rich, they had to produce a service or a product that people wanted. Oh, sorry. Is that better? Okay. Before they were super rich, they had to become rich. And how did they even get there? They had a service or a product that they envisioned, an idea they were able to bring to market that people wanted. Not one or two people, many, many people. And people were willing to pay for this product. This product benefited them, benefits society, and it is a need that we have in society. We like to increase our quality of living, and they were able to do that through their innovative spirit and creations. Which leads me to my next point. These innovations, they need to be produced or they need to be provided, which gives jobs to college students like you and me. We need entry-level positions that pay well, and these people with these innovations produce those types of products and services. So that benefits us. That gives new money into the economy. That grows the GDP. That helps to increase the amount that's out there, and that is good. It's not just shifting from one area to another. It is new, and it is improving, and that is another reason why society needs the super rich. Now, there's also another side to this. The super rich also needs society. Once they have accumulated and they've gone on and made one product, they make another product, they open a new business. I like to think of Steve Jobs with Apple, and he started with the Apple, the 2E, then you had the Mac, and then they said, we don't need you anymore. So he went on, started some other companies, got involved with Pixar. I really like Pixar. And then Apple said, hey, what? We need you back. Now we have the iPod, the iPad, the iPhone. All these things are really, really great, but they come to a point where they have everything they need, but they need us to create that legacy. And that legacy is very important. Every one of us has an embedded need to have a purpose, to have a reason, to be able to give back. And the super rich are able to fulfill that very human need by providing things like foundations. Bill and Melinda Gates, they do a lot of great work around the world. We have Carnegie Hall, there's libraries, wings of hospitals, whole hospitals for that matter of fact, research. And where you're standing today is someone's legacy. Hofstra University. Mr. and Mrs. Hofstra wanted their name to live on. They wanted to be remembered, and they wanted to give others an opportunity to get an education so they could continue and they could be more than they were now, that they could strive to maybe be the rich, even the super rich someday. Our worlds are intertwined. Society needs the super rich needs society, and it's woven like a beautiful tapestry.
Point of information.
I'm not ready for that yet. That's good. It's woven like a beautiful tapestry, and if you remove some of the threads, if you remove that cloth, it will leave holes. It will ruin the artistry that has been created. Together, we are better. The super rich and society need each other. So, in summary, they inspire us to be our best, to improve. They give us a path to follow. They create innovations that make our world better. They help us to prosper, live longer, and have an improved quality of life. They help to increase the GDP with the products and services that they produce, providing jobs, entry level, and beyond. And they give back, giving a benefit to everyone in the society. And that's why I think it is so important and why society needs the super rich. Thank you.
Next speaker representing the opposition is Mr. Parma.
Gotta love the height. Oh boy. All right. Good morning, everyone. All right, before I begin, I'd first like to thank Hofstra University for hosting this academically enriching occasion. I'd also like to thank the members of the audience, the C&E Honors class, the Economics Association, distinguished faculty, members of the Zenit Dance team, and other members of the Hofstra community. I'd also like to thank the Cambridge Union Society for giving us this fantastic parliamentary style debate and for giving us this really interesting topic. Now, before I get into the opposition's arguments, I'd like to take a look at some of the government's statements. The government began today's discussion by stating two individuals that truly have revolutionized our society: Oprah Winfrey and Steve Jobs. Now, as stated by the government, these two individuals were not always super rich. Their innovations didn't come from being super rich. Their overall accomplishments were not made possible through funding from the super rich. Steve Jobs started off in a very, very small company and worked his way up. Oprah Winfrey also started from a very educated herself and led to the philanthropic ability that she has now and that she continues to spread throughout the world. It has not been possible because of their own wealth in the beginning. It was not made possible from wealth that was given to them. They earned it. They made their way through the system. The second argument brought up by the government was that the super rich have the ability to employ workers and to create a bigger working class. If this is the case, why do we have organizations that are starting up such as small businesses? Why do we have young minds such as you here today that are going to become entrepreneurs? Why do we have these individuals? If what the government stated is correct, then only the super rich have this ability. Only they have the ability to create a working class. Now, the last argument that they stated was that innovations are from the super rich. Technology in your pockets right now, such as iPhones, you might have at home the old iPods, the iPads. All of these are from one person, supposedly, Steve Jobs. Now, as stated in the beginning, Steve Jobs didn't come from wealth. Steve Jobs earned his way up. These technological innovations come from the technological industry, from the student currently in the basement of Weller Hall studying computer science, from the student who just got his first job at Google, and from the bright young minds, as I said, in this room right now, who are going to create the next best app. The final argument brought about by the government is that the super rich have the philanthropic ability to invigorate our society, to enrich our society. Just because these individuals have the ability to spread their wealth doesn't mean they are allowed to do the economic manipulation that they do. Just because the super rich have the resources to inject money into our economic system doesn't mean they should necessarily. We, the opposition, believe that the super rich are not upholding one of the basic principles of this great nation: equality. Now, I'm not sure how many of you have read this famous work by Charles Dickens, A Tale of Two Cities, but I believe that the super rich have made two classes: the haves and the have-nots. Those that create wealth through trickle-down economics, supposedly, and those that work from the middle class and grow it. Some of you might recall the Occupy Wall Street movement of 2009, which, despite being crushed very quickly, demonstrated that there is an income disparity that exists, and a great proportion of the world's GDP is being held by a very small proportion of wealthy individuals. This is a tremendous, major economic issue because it allows the super rich to single-handedly become the most impactful group of people in the economy and markets. This brings me to my second contention. The super rich have too much power to single-handedly drive whichever products they like. They might even have the ability to erase quality, sometimes great products from our economy. There is an exile of products that are not seen as cool, that are not seen as popular by the super rich. There's a clear bias of fantastic innovations that just are not amazing to them. Those innovations might be the thing that people in third world countries or people in this room right now might need.
It might be the middle class that innovate and create wealth, but why do you think they bother to go to that effort in the first place?
The middle class?
Yes.
The middle class, after working their way through the education system or whatever education they have, they found the inspiration to do so because of their own entrepreneurial ability. They do not get money from a random funder to create their innovations. I'd like to continue by reiterating the point of equality. Equality and perfect competition is truly required in our society. If we do not have perfect competition to circulate wealth in our nation, we are not going to be able to have social mobility as we do today. A person right now might have very little in their bank account, might come out with the greatest innovation that we've ever seen, and tomorrow become a millionaire. That's social mobility. That's circulation of wealth. Not having that person who has very little in their bank account right now begging a person that is super rich to fund them. I'd like to conclude by stating that good market voting and economics as a whole is made possible through consumers, through a growing consumer base, through a growing middle class, what we have today. We have survived 30 years from the supposed proposition that we need trickle-down economics. Now, it's up to you guys here today to say whether that has worked or whether it has failed completely. These super-rich individuals are poisonous to our society. Equal representation within the economy will provide for a more diverse market. Thank you.
Next, representing the government is John PAPANTONIou.
The question that I asked the last speaker was why he thought people bothered to innovate, why he thought people bothered to put tremendous amounts of time and effort and take massive risks upon themselves to develop new products and grow the middle class, which is what he wanted to say was the important thing to do. The answer to that isn't because people like taking risks, because people like wasting their time. It's because there is a culture of the super rich that tells us that there is something worthwhile at the end. Because the problem with the case that we just heard isn't that it would be good if everyone did these things anyway. It's that the only reason that people innovate and tend to develop the economy is because there's the carrot at the end, right? There's the fact that one day you might be the next Bill Gates or the next Steve Jobs. Sorry to conflate those two people. Okay. So what I'm going to do in this speech are a few things. I'm going to explain how innovation works and why it only comes when there is a culture of the super rich and people genuinely believe that tomorrow well, maybe not tomorrow, but in many years they could be a billionaire. And also I'm going to explain why the philanthropy that these people give is such a valuable thing that it would be devastating to throw it away. But let's look at some rebuttal first. So the first thing that he said was that innovation doesn't come from the super rich guys. It comes from people who work in a university and they're trying to develop the next app. But genuinely, as I flagged in my introduction, I see no reason why you would choose to do that if it was not the case that you could develop a substantial amount of money from it, right? The guy who made Flappy Birds did not do it because he liked the idea of a game. It's because he knew he could make millions and millions of dollars putting advertising on that thing. That is why it is important there is a culture where there is a point at which you could reach if you innovate. A point at which you could reach if you choose to take tremendous risks and put work to yourselves. The second thing, also, as a second aside, he said, the super rich never contribute to anything, right? Google nearly did not exist because the founders of it were too worried that it was distracting them from grad school and there was not going to be a successful operation. It took a $25 million investment from a large company to make that idea sustainable. That's an evidence of how the super rich and the companies that they're associated with can take risks on things that might later turn out to be valuable, because you need people who are willing to take those risks and have the capital to back them if you want those ideas to come through. The second thing he said was that it's not big business that create jobs, because small business exists. Same problem. Why would you create a small business? Why would you walk out of a secure job and take tremendous financial risk upon yourselves if there was no capacity for you to one day derive some substantial benefit from it, right? Because the problem at its entirety is they want to say people will innovate and harm themselves with no plausible reason to do so. The third thing that he said was that just because people can become rich and they can help things doesn't mean that they should. What I'm going to show you is that the nature of the philanthropy of the most wealthy in society is often substantially better than what we would get from the government. Like, the short version of this argument is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has raised tremendous amount of people out of abject poverty in Africa and has tremendously helped public health in Africa. Have governments been doing the same lately? Like, do you think we're as good as a private company that really cares about these things and has directed and targeted and effective investment? Okay, the fifth thing, whatever, that he said was equality, right? And he said, it's not fair that there is inequality in society because the super rich aggregate too much wealth and it's not sort of evenly distributed. But there's a problem, right? Because simply wishing away the super rich doesn't bring equity in, like, doesn't bring the same quality of life. Because there are two kinds of equality, right? There's equality of opportunity and there's equality of outcome. What they want is sort of equality of outcome. They want everyone to live more or less the same standard of life and a particularly good standard of life. But that standard of life comes about simply because there are jobs, there is innovation, there is development in the economy, right? Making everyone equal at a lower standard is not the same as uplifting people in the way that the super rich culture that we have today does. Last thing, anti-competitiveness. Like, it might be true that some companies are a bit mean and force competitors out. It is equally true that they are often willing to take risks on things that are particularly important and new. See Google, see lots of financial investment, see lots of computer investment. I'm going to talk about two things substantively in this speech. First of all, innovation. Because as we pointed out in the first speaker in this debate, it is not an overstatement to say that the most important factor for improving the lives of a tremendous amount of people is often innovation. Think about things that have tremendously changed the way we live our lives. Things like cars, which gave mobility to vast quantities of people and helped them to start to get new jobs and get upward social mobility. Think of things like computers, which brought information and education to vast quantities of people who wouldn't have otherwise been able to get it, and also started to liberalize lots of communities through the use of things like Twitter. When you think about those things, you don't think of them in the abstract. They're often tied to specific people, right? They're tied to someone like a Henry Ford, or a Steve Jobs, or a Steve Wozniak. You think of them because these products take specific dedication and commitment to make them valuable and viable. So why does this huge amount of innovation only come when you have a culture of the super rich? First of all, it's because of profit motive, right? Because people innovate, because more or less they're going to win capitalism one day, right? Because there is a huge benefit to coming up with a new idea. Look at Silicon Valley. Importantly, you can't say that incentive wouldn't exist in a world without the super rich. Because if the cap of my income is, say, like $30 million or whatever, right? Bizarre to me that I would take a tremendous amount of risk upon myself as opposed to simply becoming a doctor or something, or not take, or just picking a job that got me to more or less the upper echelons of society. It is only when somebody genuinely thinks they could one day rule the world, they're willing to invest years and decades of their lives into these things. Secondly, the capacity for risk-taking, because often what ideas and new ideas need are backing. So for instance, Google, as I said earlier, right? Larry Page and Sergey Brin nearly sold the company because it was distracting to them and hard to sustain. It took a $25 million investment to make that thing sustainable. In a society where there are not people who can take risks on new and potentially wonderful ideas, because of the fact that there are no super rich, it's difficult to see how those things come into place. Go.
Right, firstly, use the microphone. But secondly, what do you think government innovation grants are?
Yes, okay, government can help innovate things, right? To give you an example of why that is not as good, look at something like medical innovation, right? Because government research is often where new ideas come from. This is the third thing I want to talk about. It's about the marketing of ideas, right? Because in an area like chemical drugs and stuff, right? It's true that a lot of the research often comes from sort of government, universities and things, right? The problem is that an idea doesn't end at the point that you have it. An idea ends at the point at which it's marketable and usable. The problem that often we have with universities is they can come up with lots of new drugs, come up with lots of new ideas, but they're not very good at marketing them, selling them, making them practical in the real world. That's what a culture of the super rich provides you with. It provides you with people who are willing to make these ideas usable and practical in the real world. Implausible to me that in a world where nobody is going to derive substantial financial benefit from making these products usable, why anyone would have as much of an incentive to help them. Because we can't trust a government, say, to know perfectly what the best sort of use for every single drug is, or what the best sort of thing for the future will be. We can trust people, if all of them have a substantial amount to gain, to one day find the correct answer. At the end of the day, I didn't get to my philanthropy stuff. Third speaker will deal with it. But if you believe in innovation and you like the economy and you like the fact that you have a car, a computer, and like you're going to a university as opposed to being a subsistence farmer, probably don't vote for a side that wants to take that away.
The next speaker, representing the opposition, is Poppy Damon. And Poppy, if you would please speak closer to the microphone so our people at home who are watching the broadcast can hear you.
Let me try and get this at the right height. We need some innovators to make this mic work. But with a government grant. Okay. So, John really lost this debate when he started talking about how government grants are ineffective. Because what we say on this side of the house is that what you see is in the instances of things like innovation, we see government grants are much more efficient because of the motivations that they're coming from. So we see that like with the history of the polio vaccine, this was in fact marketed for free because people saw that it was a good thing. What happens when we have individual private companies and individuals doing those investments, we see that they get marketed and sold for profit. And this is what we want to talk about on this side of the house, the dangers of isolating power and money into a select few hands, and the benefits of having that money redistributed. So first I'm going to hit these two big points that we heard from side prop. So first on this point of innovation, and I have like loads of responses. One, we say that all the innovation that they want to talk about happens anyway. We say that this happens because people want to cure diseases. We see this because people want to make better technology. We see this because people do want to have comfortable lives and have wealth. We don't think it's because people need to be the kind of excessive wealth that we want, that the proposition want to talk about. Second of all, we say that, like, in fact, often these private companies and high up rich people often actually suppress innovation. Look at the history of electric cars in this country. We see that often things created are in fact really good things, like objectively, but what happens is they get suppressed because they're not going to make money for the kind of people who have these powerful positions. Second of all, they want to talk about philanthropy. And we say, okay, Bill Gates and like Steve Jobs, I keep complaining them as well. We say that both of these people might be great, but they're not going to talk about the kind of examples that we want to talk about of people who aren't philanthropists, the ones who keep their money to themselves, the kind of ones who inject and want to affect political discourse in a negative way. And of course, they're not the kind of examples that are, although the most prevalent, are obviously not the ones we're going to hear from side prop. So I'm going to get straight into it and start talking about what I want to talk about, which is unfair political power and why this is necessarily going to be in the self-interest of those who are already in power and to consolidate their own power. So we say, how do like rich people control political movements? And we say that this happens in a couple of ways. We say trivially that money can buy you power. And this means that you can fund political Republican campaigns, or which we say is most often the case because it's always going to be self-interested. But also it can buy you things like platform, right? We say that people like Rupert Murdoch actually own the media. It means they can buy literal airspace to be able to control and like subtly and inadvertently infiltrate and progress their own political ideas. And we say that this, in a society which is democratic, where one vote, one value, where there should be accountability, what happens is that these people are allowed to exist outside of the normal controls and regulation that we would like to see. We say that they can do this by funding lobby groups, they can do this by funding pressure groups, and they can do this by having the simple high profile that they have. And yes, in the instances, on very occasionally, we think that this is have an objective good. But in most instances, we say this is bad. And we never heard a response from all the stuff that we'd heard on side proposition about the difficulties of the fact that philanthropists get to direct and fund things that they think are good and not necessarily in the best interest of people, like what we see when we see government grants. We also say, yeah, sure.
People in government are people too, right? Somebody has to make a decision as to where the best way to spend money is, but obviously if there's an individual doing it, they're more accountable and more likely to take responsibility for the spending.
Okay, one, governments are elected and we can vote them out again. Second of all, we think that like they're able to, because they're a group of people, they're able to like look at lots of different factors, right? A philanthropist only has the fact that they want to be able to put a plaque on at the end, or might have actually like the incentive to make more money out of it. We also say, causing some debate, oh good. We say that like it's just a lie to say they're more accountable because a lot of them can also buy anonymity, right? And we say that the thing is with the government is you can literally track where they're spending their money. Instead, we see that what happens with very wealthy people is that they're able to do things like fund both campaigns because they want to hedge their bets and they want to be able to lord it over those governments once they're in place and be able to do things like make threats, right? Which is what they're allowed to say things like, we'll move country or we won't employ people. And this means governments have to actually change their policies to fit with what that individual might gain from it. And we think this is hugely problematic in a society that's meant to be democratic. So to the second point of why we think this is likely to be in a self-interested way, the political capital that they're able to buy. We say, A, it's because of the fact that it's going to be likely to be self-interested because these are people who essentially want to make money, right? And they want to be able to keep the systems in place that allow them to be so wealthy and allow them to like continually tax evade and continually use their power in like slightly dodgy ways. And we say that even when the other problem is that they perceive themselves to be above the law, right? So at a certain point, when you're so wealthy, you perceive that you don't actually need the infrastructure that the government provides. And you think that, therefore, you don't owe the government anything, and you, in fact, are quite happy to exert your power in the way that you do. We say, in fact, the way that those people have got wealthy is, in fact, because of the way that government and, like, the American society is structured. They make money off using state-built roads, using state-educated employees, and they're happy to do this using the American mail service and all sorts of infrastructure that exists, yet they're not willing to have that wealth redistributed so that more people can have access to the quality of life that they have. And we think this is something that is inherently unfair, and we think it's something that's inherently going to mean that they use their political power in a negative way because they want to remain in their position of power. So finally, why do we think this is especially bad with the super rich? Because we're perfectly happy for like people to be inspired to innovate and stuff just by wanting to be comfortable and just wanting to be able to have some finance. But why is this like 1%, let's say, the real problem? We say that one, in countries like third world nations, it's specifically bad because you don't have governments to actually keep these people accountable or watch them. Instead, this means that they can basically take the place of government and can act like tycoons. They can act like completely above the law. And we think this is really problematic for what we see happening in many third world nations. But second of all, we see that like, in fact, because of how much money they have, they can make a significant difference. Like, if a middle-class person makes a donation to a campaign, that might not win it or lose it. We saw this in Britain when the Sun newspaper, owned by Murdoch, threw its weight behind Labour. It suddenly had a huge swing in Labour's favour because they ran a very negative campaign against the Conservative Party. And we think that considering that power, there is a duty for them to have to redistribute and limit that power because we think that it has like these inherent bads. So because of the fact that they have undue political power, because we think people will carry on inspiring and innovating even without being ridiculously wealthy and stinking rich, we are proud to oppose.
The next speaker representing the government is Sean Williams.
Ridiculously wealthy and stinking rich. These are very vitriolic words that do not properly represent the good that the rich actually do. These are the way. We seem to think of the rich often as a kind of money-grubbing monopoly man behind the scenes, and we ignore all the good, silent contributions that he or she and the super rich make to society. I would first like to address the idea that government funding is as efficient as private sector funding. There was actually recently a New York Times article regarding research in space, in that the government, because right now they are so strapped for funds, is having a difficult time funding astronomical pursuits, and that there are hundreds of millions of dollars being contributed in the private sector to these things. Now, these private companies have no real financial interest in this. This is simply through philanthropy. I'd also like to address the idea of lobbying groups necessarily being bad. In many cases, these groups represent the interests of the people. Every senior citizen who gets $2 off of a pancake at some random diner is being protected through lobbying groups. They have certain rights given to them. And those lobbying groups are often funded by super rich. So in many cases, the super rich are not pulling strings for their own interests. They're representing certain factions of society. Whether or not you agree with those factions depends. And I would also like to address the idea that the super rich can only contribute to what they like. What about taxes? So in many cases, the government is taking money from the super rich, and I think that's fair. I think that's a good idea. in order to contribute to things that the government recognizes as important. So just because the super rich might also contribute to their own interests, they are having a large part of their money taken away and given towards taxes in order to fund things like maybe public education or building roads or maintaining infrastructure within this country. Now, I would like to focus on the idea of a type of patronage that the super rich has. The super rich are able to contribute billions of dollars to various interests that help push society forward, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is a great example of that. But there are also other examples. What about the people who contribute money to Harvard University medical schools? You know, there is research being done medically, which was brought up, outside of the government funding, and a lot of that is through contributions from alum and other groups. The idea that patronage is a bad thing is ridiculous. Most technological, scientific, and medical funding could not happen in history without patronage. In 14th century Florence, the Medici family funded and protected a large amount of technological research done by physicists at the time. Without it, we would not have that access to information today. Historically, there is a great tradition of funding science privately. I would like to imagine for a second the world without the super rich, and in particular America without the super rich. Now, society needs the super rich, and the moment we take the super rich away from society, we see a problem in funding. Suddenly, you have hundreds of millions of dollars being taken away from science. You have hundreds of millions of dollars being taken away from medical research. Historically, artists are funded by the super rich. You wouldn't have Joyce without Harriet Shaw Weaver, and you wouldn't have Michelangelo without the Catholic Church. There are certain people culturally that have great contributions. They are artists, and they are not artists through the super rich, but they are, their abilities are broadcasted and funded through the super rich. They are able to be publicized. And I think without the super rich, it would be very difficult to recognize those same talents. So the super rich are able to contribute to education and medical funding and scientific research in a way that I think the government cannot completely do. I think that we need to acknowledge that there's a very important private sector that, separate from the government, is also able to contribute to certain aspects of society and enrich those aspects. Thank you.
The next speaker representing the opposition is Michael RHETORIC. And I'd like to remind the audience that after Mr. RHETORIC's speech, we'll begin floor debate. If you're interested in making a point or indicating a question that hasn't been addressed for you, please feel free to line up over here, and I will, at the end of his speech, give you the microphone.
Yeah, you're fine. Go, Mike, go. Yep.
Well, here we are, near the very end of it.
Use the mic.
There we go. Is it on? Or?
Good, good.
Just making sure. Some of the issues that the government has addressed at this point is the government's inability to accurately and ably fund the things that need to be funded. Well, that may be in part because people in the class of super rich, and even just the general rich, are able and have been exploiting loopholes, hiring the right amount of employees in their corporation, saying at the threshold of maybe 50 people, sorry, we are no longer taking applications, you are an economic disadvantage to us and our goals. Now, again, let's look at a world without the super rich, but let's examine it in two realities. If you were to take $7.6 trillion out of circulation, that is the aggregate wealth of every billionaire in the world. That's 1,600 people, and they have amassed $7 trillion. Take that out of the world equation, out of every economy, and put it in a black hole in a vacuum somewhere out in space. That does us no good. If you were to take that aggregate $7.6 trillion and give it to small businesses, to governments, coalitions of people able to work together that are not in the super rich, the ubermensch, the society above society, and put that to the average working man and woman, not to be, divisive or anything about it. If you give that to the people, $7.6 trillion, half of the debt that America owes to the rest of the world, you're going to see good things happen. Now, the super rich are able to be discretionary in their spending. Of course, you can have those that feel they should and can give back to Harvard Medical because perhaps say they were an alum there, that they were built on a society, within society, able to support a Harvard education, say they were able to go to Cambridge, or say they were able to go to NYU, the mother school that bore Hofstra only 75 years ago. But you also have the room for people to fund habits, to form, to be able to give back to the things that have given them pleasure. Sure, tobacco's way down and cigarettes are taxed way out the roof, but now we have the rise of the e-cigarette, which is being discovered to be scientifically as bad, if not worse, than its tobacco counterpart. And who's able to fund that? The super rich, who like a good Cuban cigar, who like the idea of investing in a company that could make an e-cigar, big fat version of the same product. Now, the opposition here would like to get into the ideal form of capitalism. The government here has tried to persuade you into thinking that we are for Marxism, Marxian policies, going back to the French Commune and taking over the capital just to, get our fair share, kill some generals, why not? But what we are actually advocating for is striving towards the ideal form of capitalism, where perfect competition is a reality, where you don't have the knowledge and the money and the power holed up in about 400 individuals in a nation of 300 million. And we hold that capitalism is a likely and possible outcome in any society, be it a monarchy, be it a socialist republic, be it a democratic republic, be it a parliament. It is possible to make or break a society. Look at the textbooks. You have Rome, had a thriving industry. It gave birth to Italy and the various European nations from it. But at one point it did fall. A series of emperors caused the policy and the effectiveness of the empire, the central empire, to collapse, and they no longer exist today, aside from in our books, but also in our art as well. Back to the Paris Commune and the Bolsheviks that were inspired by the writings of Marx, who were inspired by that action in turn, where are they today? Second world, in a collapsed empire, and generally disliked by many society, by this government, by probably you in the audience as well. But I don't want to look back in history. I want to look everywhere. We need not look any further or any farther than Enron in the 2000s, when they, a huge company, were found to be misappropriating thousands of their dollars. And not only did they become less reputable because of the discoveries made here, they also threw a tremendous accounting firm, Arthur Andersen, under the bus with them. I'd also like to take a moment to look at the innovators that we've glorified here. The Steve Jobs, the Bill Gates, the Bill Jobs, the Steve Gates, whoever we got to look at. Sure, they had a tremendous impact. They got the spark rolling from wherever it was they first got to stand at first. But you don't see them continuing to do that same line of work that they did at one point. They got promoted. They work in managerial positions where they're working on the long-term goals of the company. They aren't fulfilling the same function that they used to. A lot less of the technical work of the implementing the kinds of chips and systems and engines that go into the things we do. after Henry Ford got the assembly line going and made his fortune in Ford Motors, I'm sure he wasn't fixing people's cars. People like my grandfather, who had a business as a mechanic, they were the people fixing the cars. What we have to avoid is what Dwight D. Eisenhower warned us of so many years ago about the military-industrial complex. He actually censored himself. What he was going to say was the Military-Industrial Congressional Congress, because even in governments, you aren't entirely absented from the ability to be corrupted. You have Senate majority leaders doing land grabs, so they are earning exponentially more than any public servant should. It's ridiculous and wrong, and I think we need to end that. But the point we are trying to make is that society is not in need of the super rich. Society, in fact, is able to succeed independent of the super rich. That's what I hope we've been able to convey today. Thank you very much.
Those of you who would like to make a comment or ask a question, please come to the mic.
Yeah. We're not answering them.
We're not answering them directly.
Huh?
He's going to answer them.
He's gonna answer.
We don't need to do action response.
Oh, good. Okay. This is a silly debate. I think I would just phrase it in a way that makes us win.
All right, we're going to begin the questions now.
Okay, well, my question is for both sides. It's that should we address those who are born into the super rich differently than those who earn their way there? So, like, should we treat the Rockefellers in today's era differently than we treat the Steve Jobs? And that's for both.
Okay. Next question.
The debaters won't answer the questions now. They'll be answers will be included in the final comments from both teams. So you're invited to ask questions just as was asked, or to offer comment, or indicate something that for you has been inadequately answered.
My question is for both sides. You had mentioned something about Rupert Murdoch contributing to the last campaign. I'm wondering, isn't there something inherently democratic about being able to exercise your vote in whatever way you can and contribute to society if you feel passionate about it?
I'd like to hear more about comparing philanthropy by the super rich. I think the Gates Foundation, one of the largest, is about $70 billion. The budget of the United States government is $3.9 trillion. I haven't heard much about what the government of a democracy does to serve society compared to the pittance that comes from the super wealthy. And finally, how much incentive for innovation do the wealthy need? How much riches do they need to keep doing those things? Should we have more models like Warren Buffett? And the Hofstra law professor, Leon Friedman, says we should have a periodic wealth tax.
That's fine.
All right, my question is for the opposition, which seems to want more government, and not the government that seems to want less government. So the opposition claimed that the government can be used in place of the super rich for investment or philanthropy, et cetera. But then if the government has all these funds, then is not the government just an entity that possesses the wealth that the super rich had? And if so, why do you believe that the government would be more efficient at allocating wealth that they did not earn, but in fact took from the super rich? And if you also at the same time believe that the government is run by the super rich, how is the government then better at distributing funds?
You've lumped research all together, but it seems to me there should be a huge distinction between basic research and applied research. Obviously, the basic research is very an unlikely payoff very far in the future, which is why you rarely see private industry invest in it. And applied research, the government is really bad at picking winners. The market is much better at picking winners. So why isn't there a distinction of the government's really better at basic research and the super rich are better at applied research?
I would like to know why becoming the super rich has become a crime when the American dream has now become the American scheme to take away the money from those who ultimately founded this society. We have a top 1% or top 2% of individuals who create the jobs for the 98% beneath them, who create opportunities, who create universities for students like us to achieve more. We've seen in many Supreme Court cases where freedom of speech has gone insofar as flag burning in Texas v. Johnson, or as in FEC v. Citizens United, where free speech can be determined by corporations. So why has it become a fundamentally allowed idea to take away money from those who founded the society, who we look to for inspiration, who we look to keep our society going, and why it's okay to think that the super rich is now a problem and that we need to ultimately spread the wealth when, sure, good old Reaganomics, trickle-down effect, has happened and has made this world a better place, and that we all have a cell phone in our pocket to be able to communicate with one another. Why has the super rich become a crime?
Hello. So, my question is, since the super rich are here, since the creation of the super rich seems to progress naturally from the economic structure we have, my question is more, is the fact that they exist at all proof that we need the super rich, as they seem to have developed naturally? And if we don't need them, then why are they still around?
Right, because society creates
We've seen both sides talk about how large amounts of money can be an incentive to people to innovation and other things. I'm just wondering if these extreme amounts of wealth being held out there as a carrot can't also act as an incentive toward people being ruthless and amoral.
My question is directed at the government. You focus a lot on companies like Microsoft and things like that that do a lot to help with philanthropic goals and things like that. What would your response be to analyzing companies like Walmart, where the founder, Sam Walton, actually said that his contribution to society was having low prices in his company and that they operated efficiently? While at the same time, there's a lot of controversy today surrounding Walmart and the treatment of employees and really putting small businesses out of functioning in the society and really kind of monopolizing the market in a way. How would you see their use of their funds by an individual who could decide how that was being used? How do you see that as beneficial to society?
Thank you very much. The final speaker for the government is Rachel Tukey.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much all for coming here today, and thank you everyone for the questions you just gave me. I hope to address all of them, particularly the one that asked why we need the super rich, which is kind of my job. So today we've seen two very different conceptions of how economic markets work given to you. On the side government, they've tried to present us an idea of an ideal capitalist society, a society that has equality, a society that also manages to combine that equality with innovation and the idea of having a distribution of wealth within it anyway, but cutting out somehow the super rich, which we don't think really worked out in practice, and we don't really think the opposition proved to us today. On the side proposition, what we hope we have given you and what I hope to prove to you today is that necessarily you need the promise of innovation, which is driven by the incentive of being able to become richer and richer to the point where you are super rich, that we can have progress in society, that we can have motivation and efficiency in our economy, that we can have greater philanthropic good and greater objective goods from the companies and the products that they produce, both for charities and both for things such as medical research. And finally, we had some dispute over the political aims of these companies. So today, I'll address the three main issues which I feel we had the dispute. Firstly, the idea of innovation. Secondly, the idea of philanthropic good. And thirdly, the idea of politics. But before I go on to those points of clash, I want to firstly address some questions from the floor which don't fit quite neatly into my argument. So firstly, one of the questions we had was whether or not we should treat those who are born into wealth differently from those who become like Steve Jobs, who grow and become wealthy. We do think that there is a slight difference between those such as Paris Hilton, who's daughter of Brandon Hilton, who hasn't actually built the company. We feel that you can deal with that by having such things as inheritance tax, which necessarily give a bit back to society from wealth she hasn't created. But however, we also feel that big companies tend to work on a legacy promise. They tend to work in the idea that the son takes over from the father, that a daughter takes over from the father. And that this essentially drives them, again, as individuals, to progress their company further and to continue using the incentive of, so Paris Hilton would use the incentive of continuing the Hilton companies in order to create greater efficiency in the market and greater innovation. So we believe that the incentive still remains, while you may want to treat them slightly different if they didn't come up from nothing. Secondly, we have the idea that we haven't addressed yet what the government does with the money that they are given that they have far greater money than, say, Microsoft may have. We believe that the government does great work. We believe that they really contribute to the philanthropic aims of society. However, we believe that the money that the super rich then have in comparison would be better used, instead of the government taking away, say, $20 billion, we believe that what the government would do with that $20 billion would be less efficient than if we left the super rich on their own to use that money for philanthropic aims, to use that money to progress their companies to create more efficient products, which I hope to prove to you later on today. And finally, just briefly, we had a question about the ideas that that not all companies are good, such as Walmart, that not all companies are contributing to these philanthropic aims. Firstly, I'd like to say on the question of Walmart that we've conflated a little bit. No, thank you. We've conflated a little bit. We have conflated a little bit the idea of the individual and the company that they are in control of. So in the case of Walmart, we might say that the idea that they don't have the minimum wage, that's more of on the government to put in laws that ensure that these companies necessarily have to give a minimum wage to their employees in it. I'll take you later. And we believe that the heads of these companies themselves, that while not every super rich person is going to be perfect, not every super rich person is sort of sitting in the garden singing Kumbaya and giving loads of money to charity, we believe that on the whole, those super rich people, what they contribute to society is on the whole better than the few that we may argue do not give to charity. We believe that what people like Steve Jobs does in creating more efficient products and what Bill Gates does in giving money to charity is on the whole better for society than if we were to take that money away and get rid of the super rich and the incentive they bring. Yes, Poppy.
How can the government increase minimum wage or standards of work when Walmart continues to lobby and blackmail the government so that they can't change this legislation?
Cool. Thank you for your question, Poppy. I'll actually come on to that when I talk about politics later on. But just briefly, we believe that the fact that while there may be some issues with lobbying, we believe that firstly that this is more of an idea that we need greater democratic checks in working out a greater transparency of the democratic process. Thirdly, we believe that secondly, we believe that this isn't really an issue of the super rich. Walmart is not a person, Walmart is a company. And even if you got rid of the head of Walmart, I've forgotten his name, you got rid of him, deported him or something, Walmart would still exist. Walmart would still lobby for their own interests in Parliament. That's not necessarily an influence of the super rich themselves. That's an influence of super rich companies, which is a slightly different question today. But to go on to my substantive very quickly. Firstly, innovation. We discussed how best to create innovation. No more questions. So the opposition has tried to give you today, they've tried to say that we can produce innovation by giving loads and loads of government grants, and the innovation will come from students in universities sort of thinking up ideas. We believe this isn't true because we believe, firstly, what the government could give us in terms of grants would not be enough. It would not create the wide and broad society that we need, the broad capitalist market, to produce the greatest and most efficient products. You see that when you look at maybe like USA in the 1980s and Soviet Russia. USA, having a capitalist society, had far more innovation because there was greater money in that society. And we believe that what the super rich contribute to this is an incentive. The opposition are going under the delusion that if you got rid of the idea that you could move up in society and get more and more money, and then if you took all that money and gave it to the middle class would still have incentive to create products and to go further. But however, if they have nowhere to go, if they have no more money and a greater wage bracket to move up into, why would the middle class still create these products? So we believe that in order to have innovation, you need incentive, and the super rich and the super rich culture of America provides this to people. The idea that they might be the next Steve Jobs, even if they never actually make it, is what drives the incentive in the market rather than crushing that. Secondly, which system produces the most philanthropic good? We believe that it is empirically untrue to say that super rich individuals do not contribute to charity, and we do believe that it is empirically untrue to say that to get rid of super rich and private companies, that the government could do just as much good with that money in furthering things such as medical research. We believe instead what happens is that that private individuals can contribute to charity. We believe that they have the knowledge and the drive in order to create these private medical companies that will create better products. For example, we believe that drugs companies, the competition between them, will instead drive them to create cheaper drugs that they can sell to create a better market, which that other people can later sell things to create a market sell products into. And finally, political influence. As I said before to Poppy, we believe that private companies can offer advice to these people. We believe that it is companies, not individuals, that are lobbying them anyway. And on the whole, the super rich create a greater benefit for society than they detract from it. Thank you.
Our final speaker for the opposition is Matt Hazel.
Hello. Hello. Okay, that's much better. Right. So the problem with capitalism is that everyday society becomes a game. It becomes a game with winners and losers, with rich people and poor people. And every dollar in the pocket of the super rich, every dollar in the pocket of Bill or Melinda Gates is $1 that could be in the pocket of the most disadvantaged in society today. The narrative that government give us, this innovation and inspiration thing, is manifestly a lie, right? If I am a single mother living alone below the poverty line in Harlem, I do not care whether Oprah is giving me inspiration to drive up and become this new magical person. What I do care about is redistributive, progressive taxation laws that take money away from the people who don't need it and give it to the people who do, right? To lift me out of destitution and into financial stability. So what I'm going to tell you is basically a series of reasons why everything they said was a series of mischaracterizations about the truth and cherry-picking examples that they like to claim are representative of the entirety of the 1%. We think it's quite telling that the only philanthropist they named was Bill and Melinda Gates, because those are the only ones they know, because pretty much they're the only ones that exist. I could list about 20 others, right? We'll get onto this later. I'll give you some time to write down, say, 10 billionaires that are giving all their money to charity. And if you can do it, I will just call you a liar anyway, so it's probably not worth it. Right, so a couple of questions that don't fit into this. So the first thing we had was this idea is, do we treat people who are born rich and made rich differently? I'm not convinced this is particularly important to our case, but what we would suggest as a good idea is relatively progressive taxation laws that affect everyone, like inheritance tax, which I don't know if you have here, you probably should. It'd be quite bizarre if you didn't. But things like this will redistribute wealth most effectively into the people who need it most. Secondly, why are governments necessarily more efficient in doing certain things than private companies? The first thing to note is that there is a question of interest here, right? So the individual interest of the person who is this super rich person versus the aggregate interest of the government, which is looking out for the people of its country as a whole. We think that's more important. Secondly, more knowledge, right? The government is much better placed to decide who and what needs this aid than a private individual who's often motivated by concerns to their own thing. So Bill and Melinda Gates pick a specific problem that they think is important to them. Fair, it might be a good one, but not every charity does that, right? Not everyone gives money to the optimally most beneficial charity to help the most number of people. They often give to charities to things that are close to their hearts, which is fine, but doesn't necessarily maximize the kinds of benefits we could get. And thirdly, presumably if we don't have any super rich, the super rich people won't be able to influence the government. So problems about the super rich influencing the way in which governments spend their money goes away under our side of the house. Anyway, so the next thing, the fellow who was the champion of the oppressed 1%, who founded your society, your society. I think that it's probably just true that the founding fathers would look down on America today with disdain when they noticed that 1 in 4 people live below the poverty line, right? I don't think it's true that the super rich create 99% of the jobs in the country. That's patently untrue, especially when lots of the people who are super rich are the kind of people who work in small companies who like recruit from a specific group of people who have like degrees from Stanford or MIT or Harvard or Cambridge, right? Or who make their money from overseas oil drilling, right? Who just exploit like hundreds of thousands of Burmese civilians, right? See Exxon and Shell. So it's probably just not true that this helps. And finally, this, the circular logic, rich people exist, therefore we need them. Well, like, presumably this is true of, say, people living below the poverty line. Presumably this is true of people who are homeless. The fact that homeless people exist does not necessarily mean that we need them in society. And I would suggest that the fact that they exist is probably quite telling that there are things wrong with our society, and we should try and fix that so we can get those homeless people off the streets and into a safer, better environment. So, innovation. So things that these guys claim that the super rich do, but in actuality they don't. First thing is innovation. So a couple of questions on this. Firstly, do you need to be super rich to innovate? Patently no, because all the examples they cited were people who innovated before they were super rich. So that goes off the table. Secondly, does the possibility of becoming super rich motivate you? We don't think this is strictly true, because for every one Steve Jobs or one Bill Gates in Apple or Microsoft respectively, there are 10 or 100,000 of code monkeys who are never going to earn more than, say, like 150 grand a year, or even if they're like top levels of management, it's only going to get like $1 million or $2 million or something, right? So the possibility of becoming super rich in most cases is so out there and so difficult that most people go into these industries, go into innovate because they want to get financial stability for themselves in a way that they know they can. It's simply not true that every single graduate from, whatever top technology school you want to talk about goes into Google saying, I am going to be Larry Page, I am going to be Bill Gates. They're rather thinking, I'll get like a good, stable middle management job and be comfortable for the rest of my life. So not true, right? Next, are there better alternatives? So this is the big pharma thing. I think this is an interesting claim in America to suggest that big pharma is great because it raises competition. So, Rachel said, the competition between government. So GlaxoSmithKline compete with not Nordstrom, that's the department store. But like GSK competes with like Zafanophil or some other country or company, and that makes drug prices really low. That's just not true, right, guys? That's trivially a lie. So let's consider 2 examples, because John says it's also great because they have accountability. So let's consider the polio vaccine, right? In the 50s, Jonas Salk and all that jazz. What happened was the government gave large amounts of grants to make this vaccine. It was produced. There were no patents applied to it. This meant that the drug could be produced literally at cost, was given to almost everyone in the Western developed world, and now we have eradicated polio from the Western world, right? Let's consider the other alternatives. So let's consider something like anti-malarials, or even better, HIV/AIDS drugs, right? So Quinavir, you can rattle that off a production line for like $5 a pop, right? $5 a shot. Instead, you're being charged about $5,000 by these companies, right? Because of patent law, because of the ways in which these companies operate, right? And the stranglehold these companies have on the market means they are able to charge this amount of money for these products. It is not true that governments, are worse off at doing this because of empirical evidence. If you think that big pharma is not the cause of hundreds or like tens of thousands of Americans dying or going bankrupt from preventable diseases that if they lived on the other side of the Atlantic in the UK or France or Germany, they would have been cured of years ago, you are just wrong. Right, so why will these big... And the other thing about these rich people, right, is the fact that they just cite Bill and Melinda Gates. They go, what you're doing here is if we took all the money off all the rich people and gave it to the government would probably use most of it to help its own aims. If we consider the kind of people they're talking about, we're just relying on the goodwill of the one rich guy who went to Harvard who goes, I'll give all this money for a medical grant, and they're just kind of completely ignoring like the Roman Abramoviches, the Sheikh Al Mansours, the Glazer family who just use their money to buy sports cars and football teams, right? It's just not the case that all rich people are philanthropists. We think the government is probably going to use much more of this money to do philanthropy. So I think that is important. So finally, right, given that we've said that these things simply don't happen, the things that they want to claim rich people do that are great. What do they do? What do they actually do? What is problematic? And this is the lobbying stuff, right? Because what large corporations do is they use their particular influence to modify society to get themselves more favorable laws. So when these guys say, but lobbying is the ultimate act of self-expression and interest in democracy, it's probably not true. That's probably not the way that like tobacco companies or big oil companies approach this, right? They're using it to get favorable laws. They're using it to disregard environmental concerns and exploit the environment as much as they want. They're using it to get better place
better environmental policy for them to make more money. At the end of the day, right, the super rich are a group of people who could, if they wanted to, use all their money to make the world better. But they don't. Governments do. The government age budget of the UK is about twice what Bill and Melinda Gates give to Africa every year. For all those reasons, we urge you to oppose. Thank you.
Okay, that has concluded the formal part of the debate. You see behind you, behind me, not behind you, behind me, a phone number to text your responses, and we'll leave this up for just a moment, and then we'll switch to see what the first and the second responses were.
Also, I'd like to let you all know that tomorrow we'll be back debating again during the Common Hour, the resolution that Edward Snowden is a hero. So please come, you're all invited.
Let's have another round of applause for this group here. Has that been enough time? To get the numbers up at any rate. Yes? We're okay?
No service.
Presumably that was true at the start of the debate as well, so it'll just be like one vote.
There's the numbers from the first response. 65 said that we need the super rich. 61 said that we do not. Okay, keep those two numbers in mind, 65 and 61, roughly half. Okay, are we ready? Everybody texted? Let's see what we got. Come on. Oh, look at that. I think it's clear the House has made a decision, but I think we should again congratulate both sides for their spirited presentations. Thank you very much.